3 months later, when Magnolia Sterling would be carried in Caspian Blackwood's arms toward the altar of a Vegas chapel, she would remember exactly the moment her life turned upside down. 2:37 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, sitting in the lobby of an employment agency that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. "Ms. Sterling?" The receptionist's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I have a different kind of proposal." Magnolia looked up from her phone where she'd been calculating for the 1,000th time how long she could survive on the $347.83 remaining in her checking account. 3 weeks, maybe 4, if she lived on ramen and hope alone. Different how? The woman, who wore glasses too thick for her face and had a smile that didn't reach her eyes, slid a paper across the desk. Personal assistant position. Very generous salary. Magnolia nearly choked when she saw the numbers. This had to be a mistake, or a prank, or some kind of pyramid scheme in disguise. "What's the catch?" she asked suspiciously. "Is the boss a serial killer, or does he harvest organs on the black market?" No, nothing like that. The receptionist laughed nervously. "It's just that, well, he has a reputation for being a bit difficult." "Difficult how?" "Let's just say you would be the—" She consulted a spreadsheet. 32nd assistant in 2 years. Magnolia blinked. Once. Twice. 3 times. 31 assistants quit? Actually, only 27 quit. 4 were fired. 1 moved to another country, without notice. And 1, well, she started crying whenever she heard his name and had to go to therapy. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the window, and Magnolia's stomach growling loud enough to be heard 3 blocks away. "Can I know the name of this guardian angel?" Caspian Blackwood. Magnolia felt her blood freeze. Even she, living in her bubble of financial survival, knew that name. Caspian Blackwood, the young billionaire who at 29 commanded a business empire, collected companies like other people collected stamps, and had a tongue sharper than a Japanese katana. Ah, she swallowed hard. That Caspian Blackwood. You've heard of him. Who hasn't? The guy who made a CEO cry on national TV, who said the competition was too pathetic to deserve his attention. Who's offering a 6-figure salary to anyone who can last more than 3 months in the position? The receptionist completed. Magnolia looked at the paper again. That salary would solve all her problems. Pay her debts, the overdue rent, buy real food, maybe even replace the shoe that had had a hole in the sole for 2 weeks. "What's the worst that could happen?" she murmured to herself. The receptionist coughed. Well, the last assistant developed a specific phobia of men in suits. The one before her started having nightmares about Excel spreadsheets. And there's one who now can only work remotely because— Okay, I get it. Magnolia raised her hand. "When do I start?" You accept? I need to eat and have somewhere to live. And he can't be worse than my last boss, who made me fetch coffee 20 miles away because the place was more authentic. The receptionist looked at her with a mixture of admiration and pity. "The interview is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Address is on the form. And," she lowered her voice, "good luck. You're going to need it." The next morning, Magnolia stood before the most imposing building she'd ever seen in her life. 50 floors of glass and steel that seemed to challenge the sky, with an entrance that looked more like the lobby of a 5-star hotel. She checked her reflection in the glass door. Black suit, bought at a thrift store but nobody needed to know. Low heels, the only ones that weren't falling apart, and auburn hair pulled back in a bun that she hoped looked professional and not barely managed to leave the house on time. "Magnolia Sterling for an interview," she told the ground floor receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. 50th floor, elevator to your right." "Good luck," she said, and there was something in her tone that made Magnolia wonder if she should have brought a helmet. The elevator rose so smoothly she barely felt the movement. When the doors opened, they revealed an environment that screamed power and money: marble, hardwood, paintings that probably cost more than her apartment, and a view of the city that took her breath away. "Ms. Sterling?" Magnolia turned and found an elegant woman with perfectly styled gray hair and a smile that seemed genuine. "I'm Helena Whitmore, Mr. Blackwood's senior assistant. He's finishing a meeting, but I'd like to ask a few questions first." They headed to a smaller room, but no less intimidating. "Tell me, Miss Sterling, why do you want to work for Mr. Blackwood?" Magnolia considered lying, making up something about professional growth and challenges. Instead, she decided on honesty. "Because I'm desperate. I need the money, and apparently I'm the only person on the planet who hasn't tried this job yet." Helena blinked, surprised. Then, for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled for real. "Refreshing. Very well. Last question. Do you consider yourself a resilient person?" "I worked 3 years for a boss who made me redo reports because he didn't like the font I used. I survived 6 months selling cosmetics door to door. And I once spent an entire week eating only saltine crackers because I forgot I'd spent my grocery money on the electric bill." Helena nodded slowly. "Interesting. Very well. You may go in. And, Mrs. Sterling, don't take whatever he says personally. He's particularly irritated today." Caspian Blackwood's office was larger than most apartments. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and everything there, from the mahogany desk to the shelves filled with books, screamed success. And then she saw him. Magnolia had seen photos of him in magazines, of course, but no photo did justice to the impact of Caspian Blackwood in person. Tall, broad shoulders under a suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. Dark hair slightly disheveled as if he'd run his hand through it, and green eyes that seemed capable of seeing directly through a person's soul. He had his back to her, on the phone, and from his tone, he wasn't happy. "I don't want excuses, Peterson. I want solutions. And if you can't give me solutions in 24 hours, I suggest you update your resume." He hung up with more force than necessary and turned around. Magnolia's first thought was, "Dear God." Her second, "Now I understand why women cried when they got fired." And her third, "He looks like he's about to use me as barbecue." "Ms. Sterling, I presume." His voice was deep, with a slightly British accent that made every word sound like either a caress or a threat. "Sit down." Magnolia obeyed, trying to look confident despite her trembling knees. "I'll be direct. This isn't a normal job. I work 16 hours a day, travel without advance notice, and have zero tolerance for incompetence, delays, or excuses. Your predecessors lasted on average 3 weeks. The most resilient one managed 2 months before, leaving abruptly." He sat behind the desk, interlaced his fingers, and studied her with eyes that seemed to catalog every flaw. "Why would you be different?" Magnolia took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Because, Mr. Blackwood, I've already hit rock bottom. And when you have nothing to lose, it's surprising how much you can endure." Something changed in his face. A flash of interest? Amusement? She couldn't decipher it. "Continue. I have no illusions about this job. I know you're difficult. I know you're demanding. I know you'll probably treat me like I'm invisible at best, and like I'm incompetent at worst. But I also know this salary will change my life, and I'm willing to endure anything for this chance." The silence stretched for long seconds. Caspian studied her as if she were a particularly interesting puzzle. "Anything?" he asked finally, and there was something dangerous in his tone. "Within the bounds of legality and good taste, yes." He almost smiled. "Almost. Very well, Ms. Sterling. You're hired, provisionally. 3 months probationary period. If you can survive that period, we'll talk about permanent employment." Magnolia felt a wave of relief so strong she had to grip the chair. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. You won't regret it." "Ah, Miss Sterling," he said as she stood to leave. "One last thing. You start now. Helena will explain your duties, and he looked at his watch. I need you to cancel my 2 o'clock meeting and reschedule for tomorrow. The restaurant called to confirm dinner at 7. Please confirm. And someone from the press is trying to get a statement about the Morrison Corp acquisition. The answer is no comment until further notice. Magnolia blinked, trying to process the flood of information. Mr. Blackwood, I haven't been officially introduced to the system yet. I don't have access to contacts. He raised an eyebrow, and she realized she'd just made her first mistake. Ms. Sterling, from the moment you accepted this job, I don't know how, ceased to be an acceptable answer. Find a way. That's what I pay you for. And with that, he turned his attention back to his computer, effectively dismissing her. Magnolia left the office with her head spinning. Helena was waiting outside with an understanding smile. Welcome to the hurricane, she said, handing her a tablet and a stack of papers. I'll teach you the basics, but rule number 1 here is adapt fast or be swallowed by the storm. While Helena explained the system's contacts and Caspian's specific preferences, black coffee, no sugar, exact temperature of 158 degrees Fahrenheit, meetings no longer than 30 minutes, no interruptions between 11 and 11:30 a.m., because that's when he took international calls, Magnolia wondered what she'd gotten herself into. 3 hours later, she had canceled and rescheduled 5 meetings, confirmed a dinner, declined 3 interviews, organized the following week's schedule, and learned that Caspian Blackwood had very specific opinions about absolutely everything. How's it going? Helena asked, appearing beside her with a cup of coffee. I feel like I've been hit by a truck, but I'm alive, Magnolia replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Great. That means you can survive the first day. And look. She lowered her voice. He didn't yell at you once. That's almost a miracle. Before Magnolia could respond, Caspian's voice echoed through the intercom. Ms. Sterling, my office. Now. Helena made a sympathetic grimace. Here we go, Magnolia murmured, straightening her shoulders and marching back to what she'd already begun thinking of as the dragon's lair. Caspian was standing again, looking out the window. Ms. Sterling, change of plans. I need to travel to Los Angeles tomorrow morning. You're coming with me. Tomorrow? She stuttered. Problem? Magnolia thought of her completely empty schedule, her plants that would need watering, and her neighbor's cat that she sometimes fed. No problem at all. Good. Flight at 6 a.m. That means you need to be here at 4:30 a.m. to review the meeting documents. Helena has the details. He turned to her, and for a moment, Magnolia had the strange feeling that he was really seeing her for the first time. One question, Miss Sterling. Do you always wear that perfume? Magnolia blushed. She didn't wear perfume. Couldn't afford it. The scent he was detecting was probably from the cheap soap she used. I don't wear perfume, Mr. Blackwood. He frowned as if this were an alien concept. Interesting, he murmured, more to himself than to her. And then, suddenly, he smiled. It wasn't a full smile, just a subtle curve of his lips, but it was enough to make Magnolia's heart do a complete somersault. Until tomorrow, Miss Sterling. Try not to run away during the night. When she left the office for the second time, her legs were even more unsteady than the first time. But this time, it wasn't just from nervousness. It was also from something she refused to name. But that made her stomach churn in a completely new way. 3 months, she told herself. You just need to survive 3 months. As she organized her desk and prepared to leave, Magnolia had no idea that on the other side of the glass wall, Caspian Blackwood stood before the window, thinking about the same thing. Except his thoughts were taking a completely different direction, and a much more dangerous one. If someone had told Magnolia Sterling that she'd spend her second day of employment trapped in a private jet with the most infuriating man alive, watching him eat strawberries with surgical precision while she tried not to stare at his mouth, she would have laughed. Now, buckled into leather seats that cost more than her car, she wasn't laughing. She was questioning her life choices. 4:30 a.m. had come like a slap in the face. Magnolia stumbled into the Blackwood Industries building with coffee shop coffee and determination, only to find Caspian already in his office, looking impossibly fresh in a charcoal suit that probably had its own security detail. "You're 2 minutes late," he said without looking up from his tablet. Magnolia checked her phone. 4:32 a.m. Traffic was, "I don't want excuses, Ms. Sterling. I want punctuality." He finally looked at her, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her stomach. "We leave in 20 minutes. The car is waiting." The car turned out to be a black Mercedes that glided through empty Manhattan streets like a shark through water. Caspian spent the ride making calls in what sounded like 3 different languages, while Magnolia tried to review the meeting documents and not think about how good he smelled. Focus, Magnolia. Rent money, food money, survival. The private jet was a testament to excessive wealth. Cream leather, polished wood, and a flight attendant who looked like she'd stepped off a runway. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," the woman purred. "The usual?" "Yes, thank you, Rebecca." Magnolia settled into her seat, trying to look like she belonged in a flying palace instead of feeling like a fraud who'd snuck aboard. "First time on a private jet?" Caspian asked, amusement coloring his voice. "Is it that obvious?" "You're gripping the armrest like you expect it to eject you." She forced her hands to relax. "Just making sure I don't accidentally break anything that costs more than my annual salary." "Smart thinking. The art alone is worth $2 million. Magnolia's eyes widened, scanning the cabin with new respect and terror. As they took off, Rebecca appeared with breakfast. For Caspian, perfectly arranged fresh fruit, artisanal coffee, and what looked like a pastry from heaven. For Magnolia, a polite smile and nothing. Her stomach chose that moment to announce its presence with a growl that could have woken the dead. Caspian paused mid-bite of a strawberry, one eyebrow raised. "Problem?" "No problem," she said quickly, pressing a hand to her traitorous stomach. He studied her for a long moment, then slid his plate across the small table between them. "Eat." "I couldn't. Mrs. Sterling, I need you functional, not fainting from hunger. Eat." The strawberries were the most perfect things she'd ever tasted. Sweet, juicy, and probably flown in from some exclusive farm. She tried to eat delicately, but after days of ramen, she had to fight not to inhale everything. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" His question was casual, but his green eyes were sharp. "Define proper." "Something that didn't come from a packet or require boiling water." Magnolia's cheeks heated. "It's been a while." Something shifted in his expression, but before she could analyze it, he was back to business mode. "We're meeting with the Davidson Group at noon. They're selling their tech division, and I want it. Your job is to take notes and look competent." "Look competent. Got it. And Ms. Sterling?" He leaned forward slightly, and she caught another hint of that intoxicating scent, something expensive and dangerously masculine. "Don't speak unless I ask you a direct question." The meeting took place in a glass conference room overlooking Beverly Hills. The Davidson Group executives were exactly what Magnolia expected from Hollywood business types. Too much teeth, too much cologne, and too much attitude. Caspian, however, was in his element. He listened with the patience of a predator, asked questions that made grown men squirm, and somehow managed to convey absolute authority while barely raising his voice. Magnolia took notes furiously, trying to capture every nuance while sneaking glances at him in action. This was Caspian Blackwood unleashed, brilliant, ruthless, and completely magnetic. "The asking price is steep," he said finally, his tone neutral. "It's a fair price for a premium product," Davidson Sr. replied smugly. "Premium?" Caspian's smile was razor sharp. "Your premium division lost $12 million last quarter. Your lead programmer just quit to work for Google, and your main product is 3 years behind industry standard." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "I'm offering 60% of your asking price. Take it, or watch your division continue hemorrhaging money until it's worthless." Davidson's face went red. "Now see here, Blackwood." "Mr. Blackwood," Caspian corrected softly, but there was steel in his voice. And I've seen enough. Miss Sterling, we're leaving. They walked out in tense silence, leaving the Davidson team sputtering behind them. In the elevator, Magnolia couldn't contain herself. That was... wow. Wow? Terrifying. Impressive. Like watching a masterclass in controlled destruction. Caspian looked pleased. They'll call within the hour to accept my offer. How can you be so sure? Because I'm always sure. He pressed the button for the ground floor. Besides, I did my homework. Their company is hemorrhaging money faster than they can hide it. They need this sale more than I need their technology. As they stepped into the lobby, Caspian's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Right on schedule, he murmured, answering the call. Davidson. What can I do for you? Magnolia watched in fascination as he negotiated the final terms with surgical precision, getting everything he wanted and making it sound like he was doing them a favor. Pleasure doing business, he said finally, ending the call. Show off, Magnolia muttered. What was that? I said, good job. He looked at her suspiciously, but his phone buzzed with another call before he could respond. Blackwood. What? When? No, cancel the Seattle meeting. We're flying back tonight. He hung up, his jaw tight with annoyance. What's wrong? Magnolia asked. Crisis at the New York office. We need to leave. Now. Back on the jet, the atmosphere was tense. Caspian worked furiously on his laptop while making rapid-fire calls. His earlier good mood evaporated. Magnolia tried to stay out of his way, but the confined space made it impossible to escape the storm of his frustration. Incompetent idiots, he muttered after ending another call. I leave for one day, and everything falls apart. Maybe they're just what? His green eyes snapped to hers, and she saw real anger there. Nothing. Sorry. He stared at her for a moment, then seemed to deflate slightly. No, I'm sorry. You don't deserve my temper. He rubbed his forehead, looking suddenly exhausted. It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm the only person who cares about getting things right. It was the first glimpse of vulnerability she'd seen from him, and it did dangerous things to her chest. For what it's worth, she said carefully, watching you in that meeting today, you're really good at what you do. Thank you. His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. That means more than you might think. The plane hit turbulence then, throwing Magnolia against the window. Caspian's hand shot out to steady her, his fingers wrapping around her wrist. The touch lasted maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds of skin against skin, of his thumb accidentally brushing across her pulse point, of green eyes looking into hers with something that made her breathing stop. Then the plane stabilized, and he pulled away like he'd been burned. Sorry, he said roughly. Are you hurt? No, I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. Her wrist still tingled where he'd touched her, and her heart was doing things that had nothing to do with turbulence. The rest of the flight passed in charged silence, both of them carefully avoiding eye contact, while the tension in the cabin became thick enough to cut with a knife. When they landed in New York, it was nearly midnight. As they waited for the car, Caspian turned to her. Miss Sterling, today you've seen me at my worst and, well, not quite my best, but close to it. You've kept up, stayed professional, and haven't once complained about the chaos. That's unusual. Unusual how? My last assistant quit via text message after our first business trip. The one before that started crying in the middle of a board meeting. Magnolia considered this. Maybe you just needed someone desperate enough to stick it out. Maybe. He studied her face in the dim airport lighting. Or maybe I needed someone who isn't afraid of me. Who says I'm not afraid of you? Are you? The question hung between them like a challenge. Magnolia thought of his anger, his impossible standards, his ability to destroy companies with a few well-chosen words. Then she thought of him sharing his breakfast, of his gentle touch during the turbulence, of the vulnerability she'd glimpsed behind his perfect facade. Yes, she said honestly, but not in the way you think. Before he could ask what she meant, their car arrived, and the moment was broken. As they drove through the empty city streets, Magnolia stared out the window and wondered what the hell she was getting herself into. Because somewhere between breakfast at 30,000 feet and turbulence that had nothing to do with weather, she'd realized something terrifying. She wasn't just attracted to Caspian Blackwood, she was starting to like him. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. 2 weeks into working for Caspian Blackwood, Magnolia Sterling had learned 3 important things. 1, the man survived on approximately 4 hours of sleep and pure stubbornness. 2, he had exactly 7 different scowls, each with its own level of impending doom. And 3, she was in serious trouble because she'd started dreaming about his hands. "Ms. Sterling," his voice cut through her morning routine like a hot knife through butter. "My office. Now." Magnolia grabbed her coffee, the good stuff from the fancy machine Helena had shown her, and rushed in, nearly tripping over her own feet. Caspian stood behind his desk, hair disheveled, tie slightly askew, and an expression that could have curdled milk. He looked like he'd been up all night, which, knowing him, he probably had. "We have a problem," he announced without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves my ex-fiancée, a charity gala tonight, and the fact that I need a date." Magnolia blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Victoria Ashworth, my former fiancée, will be at the Waldorf tonight. She's bringing her new husband, and the press will be watching every move I make." He began pacing, a caged panther in an expensive suit. "I need someone on my arm who won't fall apart under scrutiny." "Okay, so call someone?" "I don't call someone, Ms. Sterling. I don't date. I work." "Then maybe skip the gala?" He stopped pacing and stared at her like she'd suggested he set himself on fire. "Skip? The Children's Hospital Charity Gala, where I'm receiving an award for my foundation's contributions, where half of New York's business elite will be?" His voice rose with each word. "I don't skip, Ms. Sterling. I show up, I dominate, and I win." "Right, of course. Silly me." He resumed pacing, muttering under his breath about impossible situations and incompetent social planners. "What about Helena?" Magnolia suggested. "She's elegant, sophisticated. Helena is married and old enough to be my mother. One of your business associates? Would create conflicts of interest. A professional escort?" Caspian's glare could have melted steel. "I am not taking a hired date to face Victoria." Magnolia was running out of ideas when the most ridiculous thought popped into her head. The kind of thought that proved she'd completely lost her mind. "What about me?" The pacing stopped. Caspian turned slowly, his green eyes wide. "You? Think about it," she said, warming to the insane idea. "I'm already on your payroll. I clean up well enough. And I'm definitely not going to cause any conflicts of interest because we both know this is purely professional. You want to pretend to be my date? I want to help you solve your problem. Isn't that what assistants do?" He studied her with that intense gaze that made her feel like he was seeing straight through to her soul. "You realize this means shopping, styling, and spending an entire evening pretending to be madly in love with me while surrounded by people who would love nothing more than to see me fail." Magnolia's heart did a little flip at madly in love, but she pushed it down. How hard can it be? 4 hours later, Magnolia discovered exactly how hard it could be. The boutique Caspian had taken her to probably didn't have price tags, because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. The saleswoman, Margot, looked like she'd stepped off a Paris runway and spoke with a French accent that might or might not have been real. "For Monsieur Blackwood's companion, we need something spectacular," Margot purred, eyeing Magnolia like a sculptor examining marble. Caspian sat in a plush chair, looking perfectly at ease while Magnolia was led to a fitting room the size of her bedroom. The first dress was beautiful, a flowing blue number that made her feel like a princess. She stepped out nervously. "No," Caspian said immediately. "No. Too sweet. Victoria will eat you alive." The second dress was black and sophisticated. No. Too safe. The third was red and bold. Better, but still no. After the seventh rejection, Magnolia was starting to lose her patience. Maybe you should just tell me what you want, instead of shooting down everything. I want something that will make Victoria realize exactly what she lost when she chose that trust fund baby over me. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, she saw past the billionaire facade to something raw and human. She hurt you, Magnolia said softly. It wasn't a question. She destroyed me. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his hands were clenched. 3 days before our wedding, she decided she preferred someone with a more established family name. Her loss, Magnolia said, meaning it. Something flickered in his eyes. You think so? I know so. Margot appeared then, with another dress, emerald green silk that seemed to shimmer with its own light. This one, she announced dramatically, this one is perfect. When Magnolia emerged from the fitting room, the boutique fell silent. The dress hugged every curve, while remaining elegantly sophisticated. The color brought out the auburn highlights in her hair and made her eyes sparkle. She looked like she belonged in Caspian's world. Well? She asked nervously. Caspian stood slowly, his gaze traveling from her head to her toes and back again. When his eyes met hers, there was something in them that made her breath catch. Perfect, he said, his voice rough. Absolutely perfect. That evening, as they rode to the Waldorf in Caspian's Bentley, Magnolia tried not to panic. Remember, Caspian said, straightening his bow tie, we've been dating for 3 months. We met when you started working for me. You're intelligent, ambitious, and completely smitten with my devastating charm. Right. Smitten. Got it. She smoothed her skirt for the 100th time. What if someone asks about specifics? Follow my lead. And Magnolia? He used her first name, which he never did. You look stunning. The compliment hit her like a physical blow. She was still recovering when they pulled up to the hotel. The charity gala was everything she'd expected and more. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, and enough diamonds to blind a small aircraft. Caspian moved through the crowd like he owned it, his hand possessively on the small of her back. Caspian Blackwood. The voice was honey over steel. They turned to face a blonde woman who could have been carved from ice and wrapped in Chanel. Victoria Ashworth, now Victoria Pemberton, stood with a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a country club catalog. Victoria, Caspian said smoothly. You look well. As do you. Her gaze slid to Magnolia with undisguised curiosity. And you are. Magnolia Sterling, she said, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. How lovely. And how did you two meet? Magnolia felt Caspian's hand tighten slightly on her back. Magnolia works for me, he said, though work became complicated rather quickly. The way he said it, with just the right amount of heat in his voice, made even Magnolia believe it. How romantic, Victoria said, but her smile was sharp. Dating your assistant, how very modern of you. When you find perfection, Caspian said, his arm sliding around Magnolia's waist, you don't let arbitrary boundaries stand in your way. Indeed. Victoria's husband finally spoke, his voice bored. Come along, darling. I see the asters. As they walked away, Magnolia realized she was trembling. You okay? Caspian asked quietly. She's terrifying. She's threatened. Did you see how she kept looking at you? Like she wanted to have me assassinated? Like she realized she made a mistake. His hand was still on her waist, warm and steady. Dance with me. What? Victoria's watching. Dance with me. The music was slow and romantic. Caspian led her onto the dance floor with natural grace, pulling her close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth of his body. You're a good dancer, she murmured. Private lessons. Mother insisted. His hand splayed across her back. You're not bad yourself. YouTube tutorials. He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound did dangerous things to her heart. "Magnolia," he said as they swayed together, "thank you. For tonight. For everything. You're welcome." They danced in comfortable silence until the song ended. As they broke apart, Caspian's hands lingered on her waist. "We should," he began. "Caspian!" A photographer appeared out of nowhere. "Mind if I get a quick shot of you and your lovely date?" Before either could object, the flash went off, capturing them in a moment that looked far more intimate than any fake relationship had a right to be. As they walked back to their table, Magnolia realized something terrifying. For a few minutes on that dance floor, she'd forgotten they were pretending, and judging by the way Caspian was avoiding her eyes, so had he. Magnolia Sterling's mother had always said that fame was like a hangover. It hit you when you least expected it and made everything hurt. Standing in a corner deli at 6 a.m., staring at her own face on the front page of the New York Post under the headline, "Blackwood's Mystery Woman," Magnolia decided her mother was a prophet. "Holy shit," she whispered, then immediately looked around to make sure no one had heard her curse in public. The photo was devastating. Caspian's arms around her waist, her hand on his chest, both of them looking at each other like they were the only two people in the world. The photographer had captured the exact moment she'd forgotten they were pretending. Her phone rang. "Helena." "Please tell me you haven't seen the papers yet." Helena's voice was strained. "Too late. I'm looking at it right now." "How bad is it?" Magnolia read the caption aloud. "Billionaire bad boy Caspian Blackwood brings mystery brunette to charity gala. Sources say the couple couldn't keep their hands off each other. Is the notorious bachelor finally tamed?" Helena's groan was audible. "He's going to lose his mind." "Where is he?" "Office. He's been here since 5 a.m., and he's in what I like to call controlled fury mode. That's worse than regular fury because he gets very quiet and very dangerous." Magnolia's stomach dropped. "I'll be right there." The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt like ascending to her own execution. When the doors opened, the usual bustle of the office was replaced by an eerie quiet. Employees whispered in corners and avoided eye contact. Helena met her at the elevator with coffee and sympathy. "He's been fielding calls from reporters all morning," she said quietly. 3 different gossip magazines want exclusive interviews. TMZ is camped outside his apartment building. And Victoria Pemberton's publicist called to clarify that Mrs. Pemberton wishes Mr. Blackwood well in his new relationship. Oh, God. "The good news is your identity is still safe. They're calling you Mystery Woman and Unnamed Companion. And the bad news? That won't last long. These people are bloodhounds." Magnolia squared her shoulders. "Is he ready to see me?" "Honey, I don't think anyone's ever ready to face Caspian Blackwood when he's this angry. But you might as well get it over with." Caspian's office looked like a war zone. Newspapers scattered across his desk, his laptop open to what appeared to be a dozen different gossip websites, and the man himself standing at the window with his back to the door. "Mr. Blackwood?" Magnolia's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. He turned slowly, and she saw that Helena was right. This wasn't the explosive anger she'd witnessed with incompetent employees. This was something colder, more controlled, and infinitely more terrifying. "Miss Sterling, how nice of you to join me." His voice was silk over steel. "I trust you've seen the morning's entertainment?" "Yes, sir." Fascinating how a simple business arrangement has become front-page news, don't you think? Magnolia felt the accusation behind his words like a physical blow. "I'm sorry. I know this complicates things for you." "Complicates?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ms. Sterling, I have reporters calling my mother. My mother, who I've spent years protecting from media attention. TMZ has a photographer following my housekeeper. And according to page 6, we're secretly engaged." "Engaged?" Magnolia's voice cracked. "Apparently, the way you looked at me last night suggested a woman deeply in love and anticipating a proposal." He picked up the newspaper and read directly from it. Sources close to the couple say Blackwood has been ring shopping at Tiffany. That's ridiculous. Is it? He moved closer, and she caught that familiar scent that now made her heart race for all the wrong reasons. Because I've been thinking about last night, Ms. Sterling, about that dance, about the way you looked at me. I was acting, like you told me to. Were you? His green eyes searched her face. Because for a moment there, it felt very real. The air between them crackled with tension. Magnolia wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to maintain the professional distance that kept her safe. Instead, she found herself staring at his mouth and remembering how his hands had felt on her waist. She began, then stopped. You what? Before she could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his expression darkened further. Victoria, he said into the phone without preamble. How thoughtful of you to call. Magnolia could hear the other woman's voice through the phone, honey-sweet and venomous. Of course I saw the papers. No, I don't think a statement is necessary. Because, Victoria, my personal life stopped being your concern the day you decided to marry someone else for his trust fund. He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening. Let me be clear. What I do, who I see, and how I choose to live my life is none of your business. You gave up the right to have opinions about my choices when you walked away 3 days before our wedding. Another pause. Good luck with that, Victoria. Though I should warn you, Magnolia isn't some society princess you can intimidate. She's got more strength in her little finger than you have in your entire body. He hung up and immediately turned to Magnolia, who was staring at him in shock. She threatened you, he said simply. What? Victoria. She said she'd make sure your life became very difficult if you didn't disappear from mine. Magnolia felt a chill run down her spine. And what did you tell her? I told her that anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to face. Why? Magnolia whispered. Because... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. Because you don't deserve to be collateral damage in my war with Victoria. Is that the only reason? He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. No, he said quietly. It's not. Before either could explore what that meant, Helena's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have a call from your mother. Caspian closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Put her through. The conversation that followed was clearly difficult. Magnolia could only hear Caspian's side, but it was enough to understand that his mother was concerned, hurt, and demanding answers he wasn't ready to give. Yes, Mother. No, it's not serious. I don't know. Mother, please. Fine. Sunday dinner. Yes, I'll bring her. He hung up and looked at Magnolia with something that might have been panic. What? She asked. My mother wants to meet you. Me? Why? Because she's seen the papers. Because she thinks I'm hiding a serious relationship from her. And because Margaret Blackwood doesn't take no for an answer. Can't you just tell her it's fake? Have you met my mother? She'd see through that in 30 seconds. And then she'd want to know why I felt the need to fake a relationship, which would lead to questions about my emotional well-being, which would result in her moving back to New York to help me sort out my life. Magnolia had never heard Caspian sound genuinely terrified before. It was almost endearing. So what do you want me to do? Come to Sunday dinner, meet my mother, pretend for one more evening that we're, he gestured vaguely between them, together, happy. The word hit her like a physical blow, because she realized with sudden terrifying clarity that she wouldn't have to pretend. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I'll do it. One more performance. He studied her face. Why? Because you protected me from Victoria. Because you shared your breakfast with me on the plane. Because... She took a breath. Because I think beneath all that armor, you're a good man who deserves to be happy. Something shifted in his expression, something soft and vulnerable that made her heart ache. Magnolia, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice. What are we doing? I don't know, she admitted. But I'm scared we're not pretending anymore. So am I. They stood there in the morning light, streaming through his office windows. Two people who had stumbled into something neither understood, but both were afraid to lose. Outside, New York hummed with its usual chaos. Reporters were probably still camped outside his building. Victoria was probably plotting her next move. His mother was probably planning an interrogation that would make the Spanish Inquisition look gentle. But for this moment, none of that mattered. For this moment, there was only truth hanging between them, like a promise they weren't ready to make. If Magnolia Sterling had known that Sunday dinner with Margaret Blackwood would involve a psychological evaluation disguised as small talk, a 3-course meal that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and Caspian Blackwood holding her hand under the table like his life depended on it, she might have fled to Mexico. Instead, she stood in front of a Hamptons mansion that looked like it had been lifted from a Jane Austen novel, wearing her second boutique dress in a week and trying not to hyperventilate. Remember, Caspian said, adjusting his tie for the 5th time, my mother is like a very elegant shark. She can smell fear and uncertainty from miles away. Comforting, Magnolia muttered, smoothing her navy dress. Any other warnings? She'll ask about your family, your education, your intentions regarding me, and probably your views on children and marriage. She's not subtle. And what are my views on children and marriage? Caspian paused, his hand halfway to the doorbell. What are they? It was such a loaded question that Magnolia felt her chest tighten. 3 weeks ago, marriage was the furthest thing from her mind. Now, standing next to Caspian Blackwood, and trying not to think about how devastatingly handsome he looked in casual clothes, it felt like a trap. I think, she said carefully, we should focus on getting through dinner first. Before he could respond, the door swung open to reveal a woman who was clearly where Caspian had gotten his stunning looks. Margaret Blackwood was 60-something with silver hair, sharp green eyes, and the kind of bone structure that probably made her a knockout in her youth. Caspian, she said warmly, embracing her son, and you must be Magnolia. The smile Margaret turned on her was warm, but assessing, like being hugged by a very friendly interrogator. Mrs. Blackwood, it's lovely to meet you. Margaret, please. Come in, both of you. I've been dying to meet the woman who's managed to capture my son's attention. As they followed her through rooms that belonged in Architectural Digest, Magnolia caught Caspian's slight grimace at his mother's choice of words. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20, but felt intimate with just the 3 of them. Margaret had clearly gone all out, crystal, china, and enough silverware to confuse a diplomat. So, Magnolia, Margaret began as the first course arrived, Caspian tells me you work for him? Yes, I'm his assistant. How wonderfully modern. And how did work become more? Magnolia felt Caspian tense beside her. They'd discussed this story, but sitting under Margaret's penetrating gaze, it felt flimsy. It was gradual, Magnolia said. Working so closely together, spending so much time, things just developed naturally. Naturally, Margaret repeated, her tone suggesting she found nothing natural about it. And your family? What do they think of this relationship? This was dangerous territory. Magnolia's family consisted of her mother in Ohio, who thought Caspian was some rich boy she worked for, and had no idea about any of this drama. They're supportive, she said weakly. How lovely. Caspian, you've been unusually quiet. Are you feeling well? I'm fine, Mother. Just enjoying watching you interrogate my girlfriend. The word girlfriend sent an unexpected jolt through Magnolia's system. I'm not interrogating, darling. I'm getting acquainted. Margaret's smile was sharp. Though I must say, Magnolia, you're quite different from Victoria. The mention of his ex-fiancée made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Mother, Caspian warned. What? I'm simply observing that Victoria was all polish and no substance, while Magnolia seems to be the opposite. Thank you. Magnolia said uncertainly. It's a compliment, dear. Though I do wonder. Margaret leaned forward conspiratorially. How are you handling the media attention? It must be quite overwhelming for someone not used to the spotlight. Before Magnolia could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and felt her blood freeze. The text was from an unknown number. Nice dinner, Magnolia. Enjoying playing house with the Blackwoods? V. Attached was a photo, clearly taken through the dining room window, of the three of them at the table. Excuse me, Magnolia said, standing abruptly. I need to powder my nose. She practically fled to the bathroom, hands shaking as she stared at the message. Victoria was having her watched, photographed. This was beyond petty jealousy. This was stalking. A soft knock interrupted her panic. Magnolia! It was Caspian. Are you all right? She opened the door and wordlessly handed him her phone. The transformation was immediate. His face went from concerned to furious in the span of a heartbeat. She's having you followed, he said, his voice deadly quiet. This is insane. I'm nobody. I don't matter. You matter to me. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Magnolia felt something crack open in her chest. Caspian, I mean it. This has gone too far. He was already dialing. Harrison, it's Blackwood. I need security on Magnolia Sterling immediately. Yes, 24/7. Because my psychotic ex-fiancé is having her stalked. When he hung up, Magnolia was staring at him. You just assigned me bodyguards. I just protected what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Instead, it sent heat racing through her veins. What's yours? He stepped closer, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his green eyes. You are. Whether this started as pretend or not, whether we know what we're doing or not, you're mine, Magnolia, and I protect what's mine. Before she could process that declaration, they heard Margaret calling. Children? Is everything all right? They returned to find Margaret looking concerned and curious. Sorry, Magnolia said. Work emergency. On Sunday? Margaret's eyebrow rose. How dedicated of you. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and Margaret's increasingly pointed questions. By dessert, Magnolia felt like she'd been through a blender. Well, Margaret said as they prepared to leave, this has been enlightening. She hugged Caspian goodbye, then turned to Magnolia. Walk with me, dear. It wasn't a request. Margaret led her to the garden while Caspian waited by the car. My son is in love with you, Margaret said without preamble. Magnolia's heart stopped. I'm sorry? Oh, he doesn't know it yet. Caspian has always been dense about his own emotions, but I've watched him through 3 serious relationships, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Mrs. Blackwood, Margaret. And the question is, dear, what are you going to do about it? I don't understand. My son is brilliant, successful, and ridiculously attractive. He's also been hurt badly and has walls higher than this house. If you're just playing games, if this is about money or fame, walk away now. But if you care about him, really care, then fight for him. Magnolia felt tears prick her eyes. It's complicated. Love always is, but Caspian deserves someone who will love him for who he is, not what he has. The question is, are you that someone? Before Magnolia could answer, Caspian appeared. Ready? He asked, but his eyes were on his mother's face, clearly trying to read the conversation. Quite ready, Margaret said smoothly. Magnolia, it's been lovely meeting you. I do hope we'll see more of each other. The drive back to the city was quiet. Caspian seemed lost in thought, while Magnolia replayed Margaret's words on an endless loop. She likes you, he said finally. How can you tell? She didn't try to have you deported. Despite everything, Magnolia laughed. High praise. With my mother it is. He glanced at her. What did she say to you in the garden? Magnolia considered lying, giving him some safe, meaningless answer. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. She said you're in love with me. Caspian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. And what did you say? I said it was complicated. Is it? They were stopped at a red light. The city buzzed around them, but inside the car, there was only the two of them, and a question that could change everything. Yes, she whispered, because I think I might be in love with you too. The light turned green, but Caspian didn't move. He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw wonder, fear, and something that looked like hope. Magnolia! A car honked behind them, breaking the spell. Caspian drove the rest of the way to her apartment in silence, both of them too shaken by her admission to speak. When they pulled up to her building, he turned off the engine. We need to talk, he said. I know. But not tonight. Tonight I need to process what you just said. What it means. What I want it to mean. She nodded, understanding. This was too big, too real to rush. Good night, Caspian. Good night. She was halfway to her door when he called her name. Magnolia. For what it's worth, I think my mother is right. He drove away before she could ask what he meant, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with her heart racing and her world completely upended. Inside her apartment, she found a text from the security company Caspian had hired. Her protection detail would start tomorrow. Another text came in, this one from Caspian. Sweet dreams, and don't worry about Victoria. I won't let her hurt you. As Magnolia got ready for bed, she realized that somewhere between pretending to be his girlfriend and actually falling for him, she'd stopped thinking about the job, the money, or the 3-month contract. She'd started thinking about forever, and that was the most terrifying thought of all. Later, when Magnolia Sterling would recount this story to their children, she would describe Monday morning as the day Daddy almost lost the best thing that ever happened to him because he's an idiot. But at 8:47 a.m., standing in Caspian Blackwood's office while he paced like a caged tiger and systematically destroyed her heart with clinical precision, she had other words in mind. Much less family-friendly ones. This has to stop, Caspian announced without preamble the moment she walked in, not even looking up from the stack of newspapers on his desk. Magnolia's stomach dropped. After last night's confessions and the electric tension in his car, she'd expected many things. This wasn't one of them. What has to stop? This. He gestured sharply between them. Us. Whatever this pretense has become. The word pretense hit her like a physical slap. I see. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. And what brought on this sudden clarity? He finally looked at her, and his green eyes were cold, distant. Nothing like the man who'd called her his just 12 hours ago. Reality, Miss Sterling. I spent the night thinking about what you said, what my mother said, what this whole situation has become. And I realized we've lost sight of what this actually is. Which is? A business arrangement that got out of hand. Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep. And they did. I see, she repeated, pride keeping her spine straight even as everything inside her crumbled. So last night was a mistake. We both got caught up in the performance, confused reality with fiction. It happens. Right, of course. She nodded like this made perfect sense, like her heart wasn't currently being fed through a shredder. How silly of me to think otherwise. Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, pain. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. I've spoken with my legal team. We're prepared to offer you a substantial severance package, enough to set you up comfortably for quite some time. You're firing me. I'm releasing you from an impossible situation before it gets worse. Worse for whom? For both of us. He moved to the window, putting distance between them. You don't belong in this world, Magnolia. The media attention, the threats from Victoria, the constant scrutiny. You deserve better than being collateral damage in my life. Shouldn't that be my decision to make? Not when you don't understand the consequences. Anger finally broke through the hurt, hot and cleansing. Don't you dare, she said, her voice rising. Don't you dare stand there and tell me I don't understand consequences. I've lived with consequences my entire life. Every choice I've made, every risk I've taken, every dollar I've spent. Consequences. You don't get to decide what I can and can't handle." He turned back to her, and for a moment, his mask slipped. She saw the man who'd held her while they danced, who'd protected her from Victoria, who'd looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. "You think this is easy for me?" he asked, his voice rough. "I think this is cowardly." The word hung between them like a challenge. Caspian's jaw tightened. "Cowardly? You're scared. Scared of what you feel. Scared of what it means. Scared of being vulnerable again. So you're running. And you're using my protection as an excuse." "That's not—" "It is exactly that. You told me I was yours, Caspian. You said you'd protect what was yours. Well, you can't protect me from yourself by throwing me away." Her voice broke on the last word, and she saw him flinch. "Magnolia." "No." She held up a hand, gathering the shreds of her dignity. "You've made your position clear. You want me gone? Fine. But don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is for my own good." She turned to go, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I wasn't confused about anything last night. I knew exactly what I was saying. It's a shame you didn't." Helena was waiting outside with tissues and coffee, which meant she'd heard everything. The woman had the sensitivity of a Secret Service agent and the heart of a mother. "He's an idiot," Helena said without preamble. "He's my boss, was my boss. He's a scared little boy who's been hurt before and doesn't know how to handle someone actually loving him for who he is instead of what he has." Magnolia accepted the coffee gratefully. "Doesn't matter now." "Doesn't it?" "Because he's been standing at that window for the past 10 minutes looking like someone shot his dog." Despite everything, Magnolia almost smiled. "He doesn't have a dog." "Exactly. The man needs something to love that isn't a quarterly profit report." Before Magnolia could respond, Caspian's voice echoed through the intercom. "Helena, could you come in here, please? And could you ask Ms. Sterling to gather her personal items? Security will escort her out." The dismissal was so cold, so final, that Magnolia felt something die inside her chest. "Son of a bitch," Helena muttered, then pressed the intercom button. "Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, you can escort yourself to hell." She released the button and turned to Magnolia. "Don't you dare let him do this! Don't you dare let him throw away the best thing that's ever happened to him because he's too stubborn to admit he's in love. Helena, no. Listen to me. I've worked for that man for 8 years. I've seen him with Victoria, with the socialites, with the models and the heiresses. None of them saw him. None of them challenged him. None of them made him laugh or made him human or made him better. You do all of that." Tears burned Magnolia's eyes. "It doesn't matter if he doesn't want it. He wants it. He's just too terrified to take it." The elevator dinged, and 2 security guards stepped out, looking uncomfortable. "Ms. Sterling?" one of them said apologetically. "We're sorry, but we need to escort you from the building." Helena's face went thunderous. "This is ridiculous." "It's okay," Magnolia said quietly. She gathered her few personal items, a coffee mug, a small plant, a photo of her and her mother, and walked toward the elevator with as much dignity as she could muster. As the doors were closing, she heard Helena's voice, loud enough to carry through the office. "Caspian Blackwood, you are making the biggest mistake of your life." The security detail Caspian had assigned her was waiting outside the building. 2 professional-looking men who introduced themselves as Marcus and James. "Ms. Sterling," Marcus said politely, "we'll be maintaining a discreet distance, but we're here if you need anything. I think Mr. Blackwood may have changed his mind about the protection detail. Actually, ma'am, our contract is paid through the end of the month. Those were his specific instructions." Even in his anger, even while breaking her heart, he was still trying to protect her. The thought made her want to cry and scream in equal measure. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Trouble in paradise? I heard there was quite a scene at Blackwood Industries this morning. Coffee? V. Victoria." Somehow she'd already heard about the breakup. Magnolia stared at the message, then made a decision that would have terrified her yesterday, but today felt inevitable. She typed back, "Name the place." The coffee shop Victoria chose was the kind of place where everything cost $20 and came with a side of pretension. Victoria was already there, looking immaculate in white Chanel, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Magnolia, darling," she said, as if they were old friends. "You look, well, considering." "Cut the act, Victoria. What do you want?" "Straight to the point. I like that." Victoria stirred her coffee with delicate precision. "I want to know if you're finally ready to be reasonable." "Meaning?" "Meaning it's time to disappear from Caspian's life permanently." "From what I hear, he's already started the process." Magnolia kept her expression neutral, even though Victoria's words hit their mark. "And why would I do that?" "Because, darling, you're out of your depth. You think last night's little scene at dinner went unnoticed? You think the press won't figure out who you really are? You're Magnolia Sterling from Ohio, whose mother works at a diner and whose father walked out when you were 10. You have student loans, credit card debt, and until 3 weeks ago, you were nobody. Each fact was delivered like a precision strike, but instead of devastating Magnolia, they did something unexpected. They made her angry. "You're right," she said calmly. "I am all of those things. I am nobody special, nobody important, nobody who belongs in penthouses and private jets. But you know what? Caspian saw all of that and chose me anyway. Not because of my trust fund or my family name or my social connections. He chose me." "And yet," Victoria smiled, "here you are, unemployed, heartbroken, and alone. Some choice." "Here I am," Magnolia agreed. "But unlike you, Victoria, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying to get back something I lost. Caspian isn't a prize to be won. He's a man who deserves to be loved. And if he can't see that, if he's too scared to accept it, then that's his loss, not mine." She stood up, leaving Victoria looking stunned. "Oh, and Victoria, if you come near me again, if you threaten me, follow me, or even look at me wrong, I'll make sure every gossip rag in the city knows exactly what kind of person you really are. I may be nobody, but I'm nobody with nothing left to lose. And that makes me very dangerous." As she walked out of the coffee shop, Magnolia felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in weeks, she knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. Now she just had to figure out if she was brave enough to fight for it. 3 days after Caspian Blackwood destroyed her heart with surgical precision, Magnolia Sterling was standing outside the Blackwood Industries building at 8 a.m., wearing her original thrift store suit and carrying a folder that contained either her salvation or her complete humiliation. Helena had texted her the night before with 4 words: "Board meeting. Today. Come." It wasn't exactly an invitation, but it was a chance. And sometimes, that's all you need to change everything. The lobby buzzed with its usual morning energy, but Magnolia noticed something different. Worried whispers, concerned faces, and an undercurrent of tension that made her stomach clench. "Ms. Sterling?" The receptionist looked surprised. I thought you no longer worked here?" "I don't. But I need to see Helena Whitmore. It's urgent." The elevator ride felt eternal. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, the chaos was immediate. Employees hurried between offices with stacks of papers, phones rang constantly, and the air crackled with crisis energy. Helena spotted her immediately and rushed over, looking frazzled in a way Magnolia had never seen. "Thank God you came," Helena said, pulling her aside. "It's a disaster. Complete meltdown." "What's happening?" "Victoria happened. She's been busy since your coffee date. Somehow she's convinced 3 major investors that Caspian is emotionally unstable and making erratic business decisions. They're threatening to pull their backing unless he steps down as CEO. Magnolia's blood chilled. Can they do that? If they get board approval, yes. The meeting starts in 20 minutes, and from what I can tell, it's going to be a massacre." "Where is he?" "In his office, probably planning to fall on his sword with dignity rather than fight for what's his." Helena grabbed her arm. He's been impossible since Monday, snapping at everyone, working 18-hour days and looking like he hasn't slept since he let you walk away. Helena, I can't just... Yes, you can. You're the only one who can. That man is about to lose everything he's worked for because he's too proud and too scared to admit he made a mistake. Before Magnolia could argue, the elevator dinged, and a stream of suited board members emerged, their faces grim and purposeful. They're early, Helena muttered. Magnolia, whatever you're going to do it now. Caspian's office felt different. The energy that had always hummed beneath the surface was gone, replaced by something cold and defeated. He stood at his window in a charcoal suit that should have made him look powerful, but instead made him look hollow. Helena, I told you I don't want to be disturbed. He turned and stopped mid-sentence when he saw her. Hello, Caspian. For a moment his mask slipped completely. She saw relief, longing, and something that looked like desperate hope flash across his face before he shut it down. Miss Sterling, what are you doing here? Helena told me about the board meeting. I see. Come to watch the fall of the Empire? Come to stop you from being an idiot. His jaw tightened. I believe we've already established that this is none of your concern. Wrong. She stepped closer, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the way his tie was slightly askew, details that spoke of a man barely holding it together. This is entirely my concern because I love you. He flinched like she'd slapped him. Magnolia. No, you don't get to talk yet. You fired me, remember? So technically you're not my boss, which means I can say whatever the hell I want. Despite everything, she saw the ghost of a smile tug at his lips. You're going to let Victoria win, she continued. You're going to walk into that boardroom and hand her exactly what she wants because you're too terrified to fight for what you want. You don't understand. I understand that you think you're protecting me by pushing me away. I understand that Victoria has convinced some old men in suits that you're unstable because you dared to fall in love with someone beneath your social station. And I understand that you're about to prove her right by giving up without a fight. The board members aren't wrong, he said quietly. I have been making decisions based on emotion lately. I hired security for you. I threatened legal action against Victoria. I've been distracted, unfocused. You've been human. She moved closer, close enough to see the pain in his green eyes. For the first time in your adult life, you've been acting like a man instead of a machine. And that terrifies you more than losing your company. If you lose the company, you'll build another one. You're brilliant, driven, and stubborn as hell. But if you lose yourself, if you go back to being that cold, untouchable man who never lets anyone in, you'll have lost something much more valuable. The intercom crackled to life. Mr. Blackwood, the board is assembled and ready for you. Caspian closed his eyes briefly. I have to go. Yes, you do. But not alone. Magnolia, I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Try and stop me. They stared at each other, and she saw the exact moment he realized she meant it. This could destroy what's left of your reputation, he warned. I don't care. Victoria will be there. She'll tear you apart. Let her try. Why? The question was raw, vulnerable. Why would you do this? Because 3 weeks ago you gave me a chance when no one else would. Because you saw something in me worth protecting. Because you're the best man I've ever known, even when you're being an ass. She reached up and straightened his tie. And because someone needs to show you that you're worth fighting for. The boardroom was a battlefield disguised as a conference room. 12 stern-faced board members sat around a table that could have doubled as a landing strip, while Victoria perched in the corner like a perfectly dressed vulture. Gentlemen, Caspian began, his voice steady and professional. I understand there are concerns about my recent performance. Concerns? Harrison Blackwood, Caspian's uncle and the board's chairman, interrupted. Caspian, you've been erratic, impulsive, and frankly, unprofessional. This business with your assistant, the media circus, the public displays. The public displays, Victoria interjected smoothly, of a man clearly not in control of his emotions or his judgment. That's when Magnolia stepped into the room. The silence was deafening. 12 pairs of eyes turned to her, ranging from curious to hostile. "I'm sorry," she said calmly, "but I couldn't help overhearing." "You're discussing my employer's fitness for leadership?" "Miss, this is a private board meeting," Harrison began. "Sterling. Magnolia Sterling. And you're absolutely right. This is private, which makes it fascinating that Mrs. Pemberton is here, considering she has no official connection to this company." Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. "I have a legitimate interest in destroying the man who rejected you. Yes, I can see how that would feel urgent." "Now see here," one of the board members sputtered. "No, you see here." Magnolia's voice carried the authority that surprised even her. "You want to remove Caspian Blackwood because he's been emotional. Let me tell you what I've seen in the past month. I've seen a man who works 16-hour days because he cares about this company and every person in it. I've seen him personally mentor junior executives, remember the names of security guards' children, and donate millions to charity while ensuring it never makes the papers." She moved to stand beside Caspian, drawing strength from his proximity. "You think he's been distracted? He just closed the Davidson acquisition under budget and ahead of schedule. You think he's unstable? He's increased company profits by 30% this quarter. You think he's unprofessional? He's the most professional man I've ever met." "And what qualifies you to make these assessments?" Victoria asked, her voice honey over poison. "I'm the woman who loves him," Magnolia said simply. "I'm the woman who's seen him at his best and his worst, who knows what he's like when he's not performing for boardrooms and cameras. And I'm here to tell you that if you remove him, you'll be making the biggest mistake in this company's history." The room erupted in murmurs. Harrison banged his gavel. "This is highly irregular. So is staging a coup based on gossip and vindictiveness," Caspian said, finding his voice. "Uncle Harrison, I've given everything to this company. Every decision I've made has been in its best interest. If falling in love makes me unfit to lead, then perhaps you need to examine what kind of leaders you want." He turned to address the room. "I won't apologize for being human. I won't apologize for caring about someone more than quarterly reports. And I won't step down to appease people who mistake emotional intelligence for weakness." Victoria stood, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. You're all being manipulated by some gold-digging nobody who—" "Enough!" The voice was Margaret Blackwood's, cutting through the chaos like a sword. She stood in the doorway, elegant and formidable in navy Chanel. "Victoria, I believe you've said quite enough." Margaret, I was simply— You were attempting to destroy my son out of spite and wounded pride. Gentlemen," she addressed the board, "I may not have a vote here, but I have a voice. And I'm telling you that removing Caspian would be the height of stupidity." She moved to stand with her son and Magnolia, a united front against the room's hostility. "Harrison," she continued, "you've known Caspian since he was a boy. You've watched him build this company into what it is today. Are you really going to let petty gossip and a vindictive ex-fiancé undo everything he's accomplished?" Harrison looked around the room, reading the faces of his fellow board members. The tide was turning. "I call for a vote," he said finally. "All in favor of retaining Caspian Blackwood as CEO?" 9 hands rose. 3 abstained. Victoria's face went white with fury. "This isn't over," she hissed, gathering her purse. "Yes," Magnolia said quietly. "It is." As the board members filed out, murmuring among themselves, Caspian turned to her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "Why?" "Because you're worth it. Because we're worth it. And because I'm tired of being afraid." He cupped her face in his hands, and she saw everything in his eyes. Love, gratitude, and something that looked like forever. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry. I know. I love you. I've loved you since that first day when you told me you'd hit rock bottom. I just didn't know how to handle it. I know that too. Can you forgive me? That depends, she said, smiling through her tears. Are you done being an idiot? Completely reformed. Then yes, I can forgive you. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of promise, while his mother discreetly wiped away tears and Helena cheered from the doorway. When they broke apart, Caspian rested his forehead against hers. So what happens now? Now, Magnolia said, we stop pretending and start living. 6 months later, Magnolia Sterling would realize that trying to plan a surprise proposal while living with Caspian Blackwood was like trying to hide Christmas presents from Santa Claus, technically possible, but requiring the organizational skills of a CIA operative and the acting abilities of Meryl Streep. What she didn't expect was that her meticulous planning would collide spectacularly with his meticulous planning, resulting in the most beautifully chaotic engagement in Manhattan history. You're acting strange, Caspian announced over breakfast, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal, but somehow still managing to sound accusatory. Magnolia nearly choked on her coffee. Strange how? Yesterday you asked Helena about my schedule for the next 3 weeks. You've been taking mysterious phone calls, and last night you muttered emerald cut or princess cut in your sleep. Damn it. She'd been planning this proposal for weeks, carefully coordinating with Helena, Margaret, and half of Manhattan's luxury vendors. The plan was perfect, a recreation of their first dance at the charity gala, complete with the same song, the same flowers, and a ring that would make the Hope Diamond weep with envy. Maybe I'm planning your birthday surprise, she said weakly. My birthday is in January. It's July. Early planning. Caspian finally looked up, his green eyes sharp with suspicion and something that looked like amusement. Magnolia Sterling, are you planning to propose to me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. They'd been living together for 3 months, officially dating for 6, and she'd been in love with him for what felt like forever. But Caspian Blackwood was old-fashioned about some things, and she'd assumed he'd want to be the one to propose. Would that bother you? She asked carefully. It would bother me if you beat me to it. Her heart stopped. Beat you to it? I've had a ring for 2 months, Magnolia. I've been waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect... You have a ring. You don't think I'd let you walk into that boardroom and fight for us without having every intention of making you my wife, do you? She stared at him, then started laughing. The kind of laughter that comes from relief and joy and the absurd realization that they'd been circling each other like lovesick sharks for months. We're both idiots, she gasped. Speak for yourself. My plan was flawless. What was your plan? Tonight, dinner at Le Bernardin, a walk through Central Park, and a proposal under the gazebo where we had our first real conversation about this fake relationship. Magnolia's heart melted. That's beautiful. What was your plan? Tomorrow night. A recreation of our first dance, complete with the charity gala ballroom and the same string quartet. Caspian blinked. You hired the Pierre's ballroom? And the same catering staff. And I may have bribed the photographer to recreate that picture that started this whole mess. Christ, Magnolia, that must have cost everything I've saved since you gave me that ridiculously generous salary. But it would have been worth it. He stood up slowly, walked around the table and pulled her into his arms. Would have been. Well, now that we've both ruined the surprise. Who says anything is ruined? Before she could ask what he meant, he was kissing her, soft and sweet and full of promises. New plan, he murmured against her lips. We do both. Both? Your proposal tonight, my proposal tomorrow. 2 engagements are better than 1. That's insane. That's us. That evening, Magnolia stood in the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, wearing the emerald dress from their first public appearance together, and trying not to hyperventilate. The space had been transformed into a perfect replica of that charity gala, the same flowers, the same lighting, even the same table settings. Caspian arrived exactly at 7, wearing the same tuxedo he'd worn that night, looking every inch the billionaire prince who'd swept her off her feet. "Miss Sterling," he said formally, offering his arm, "would you care to dance? I thought you'd never ask." The string quartet began playing their song, and suddenly she was back in that moment when everything changed, when pretending became real, and real became everything. "I have something to say," she said as they swayed together. "I'm listening. 6 months ago, I walked into your office desperate and broke and convinced I had nothing to offer the world. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You gave me a chance, a job, and eventually, your heart." Her voice was shaking, but she pressed on. "You made me believe I was worth something, worth fighting for, worth loving, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that your faith in me wasn't misplaced." She stepped back and, to his utter shock, dropped to one knee. "Caspian Blackwood, you arrogant, impossible, wonderful man, will you marry me?" The ring she offered was perfect, a platinum band with a simple, elegant design that screamed understated luxury, exactly his style. For a moment, he just stared. Then he started laughing. "You magnificent, crazy woman! Yes, yes, of course, yes!" He pulled her to her feet and kissed her while the photographer captured the moment, while Helena dabbed at her eyes from the corner, and while Margaret Blackwood watched from the balcony with the satisfied smile of a woman whose matchmaking instincts had been vindicated. "My turn," Caspian said, when they broke apart. "What?" "Tomorrow night is my proposal. Tonight was yours. Tomorrow you get to say yes." "You're assuming I'll say yes." "I'm Caspian Blackwood. I don't assume. I plan for every contingency. And if I say no?" His smile was wicked. "Then I'll keep asking until you say yes. I'm very persistent. I've noticed." The next evening, Magnolia found herself in Central Park, walking hand in hand with her fiancé toward the gazebo, where they'd had their first honest conversation. The path was lined with fairy lights, and she could hear soft music in the distance. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "Wait until you see the rest." The gazebo had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. White roses, twinkling lights, and candles created an intimate sanctuary in the middle of the busy park. A violinist played softly in the corner, and champagne waited on ice. "Caspian, this is perfect, like you." He led her to the center of the gazebo, then dropped to one knee with the grace of a man who'd practiced this moment 1,000 times. "Magnolia Sterling, 6 months ago, you walked into my life and turned everything upside down. You challenged me, changed me, and somehow convinced me that I was worthy of being loved for who I am, not what I have." The ring he offered was spectacular, an emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured stars. "You fought for us when I was too scared to fight for myself. You saw through my armor to the man underneath. You made me want to be better, to be worthy of your love." His voice was rough with emotion. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I promise to spend every day proving that I'm worthy of the gift you've given me. Magnolia Sterling, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything else about them. "2 engagements in 2 days, she said as he pulled her into his arms. "Think we set a record?" "I don't care about records. I care about you." "Good answer." They danced in the gazebo while New York hummed around them, 2 people who'd found something extraordinary in the most ordinary of circumstances. "So what happens now?" Magnolia asked. "Now we start planning a wedding that will either be the event of the season or a complete disaster. Knowing us, probably both. Probably, but Helena will help. Your poor assistant is going to earn every penny of her salary." "Our assistant," Caspian corrected. "And yes, she is. Speaking of which." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wrapped box. "What's this?" "A thank you gift. For Helena. From both of us." Magnolia opened it to find a beautiful watch engraved with the words, "To the woman who made miracles happen. Thank you for everything. C&M." "She's going to cry," Magnolia said, her own eyes filling with tears. "She's going to take credit for the entire relationship. She should. Without her, we'd probably still be circling each other like idiots. We are idiots, but we're idiots in love. The best kind." As they left the park, hand in hand and thoroughly engaged, Magnolia couldn't help but think about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been desperate, broke, and convinced she'd never amount to anything. Now she was engaged to the love of her life, had a career she was passionate about, and a future that stretched ahead like an endless possibility. "Any regrets?" Caspian asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Only one." "What's that?" "I wish I could go back and tell that girl sitting in the employment agency that taking the job nobody wanted would turn out to be the best decision of her life. Maybe we can tell our children that story someday." "Children?" Her heart skipped a beat. Too soon? Not soon enough. He spun her around right there on Fifth Avenue, both of them laughing like the lovesick fools they were. In the distance, a photographer from the New York Post captured the moment, but this time, neither of them cared. They were done hiding, done pretending, done being afraid of what the world might think. They were just Caspian and Magnolia, two people who'd found something worth fighting for, and they were finally ready to fight for it together. 2 years later, the wedding had been, as predicted, both the event of the season and a complete disaster. The flowers arrived late, the cake collapsed, and Victoria Pemberton showed up uninvited, only to be escorted out by security. But none of that mattered when Caspian saw Magnolia walking down the aisle in her grandmother's dress, looking like every dream he'd never dared to have. They'd said their vows through tears and laughter, promised to love each other through boardroom battles and breakfast disasters, and sealed it with a kiss that made the society pages for all the right reasons. Now, standing in the nursery of their Upper East Side penthouse, watching Caspian attempt to assemble a crib while muttering creative curses at the instruction manual, Magnolia couldn't stop smiling. "Need help?" she asked, one hand resting on her 7-month pregnant belly. "I have 3 engineering degrees and an MBA, he said without looking up. "I can handle 1 crib." "Mm-hmm. Is that why you've been working on it for 3 hours?" "It's a very complicated crib. It's from IKEA, Caspian." He looked up at her with those green eyes that still made her heart skip, his hair disheveled and his expensive shirt wrinkled. "Are you mocking your husband?" "Always." "Good. I'd hate for pregnancy to change your charming personality." She waddled over and kissed his forehead. "How about I make us some lunch and you call Helena? She assembled her crib in 20 minutes. "Helena doesn't count. Helena could probably assemble a space shuttle with her eyes closed." "True. But she could also assemble our crib." Caspian sighed and pulled out his phone. "Helena, it's Caspian. I need you to come over and—" "What do you mean you've been expecting this call?" Magnolia left him arguing with his assistant and made her way to the kitchen where a magazine lay open on the counter. The headline read, "Power Couple: How Caspian and Magnolia Blackwood Built an Empire." The article detailed their joint business ventures, the scholarship fund they'd started for underprivileged students, the mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, and the nonprofit that helped people transition out of poverty. What had started as a fake relationship had become a real partnership in every sense of the word. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Darling, saw the article. So proud of you both. Can't wait to meet my grandchild. P.S. Tell my son to stop being stubborn about the crib and call Helena." Even from her estate in the Hamptons, Margaret Blackwood knew everything. "Helena's on her way," Caspian announced, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "She's also bringing Chinese food and her I told you so face." "I love Helena." "So do I. Remind me to give her another raise." He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her growing belly and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly, deliriously. Even though you married a man who can't assemble furniture? Especially because I married a man who's willing to try. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city bustle below them. Two people who'd found their happy ending in the most unexpected place. Magnolia. Thank you. For what? For taking the job nobody wanted. For being brave enough to fight for us. For making me believe in happy endings. She turned in his arms and looked up at him, this man who'd changed her entire world. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. I didn't save you, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just gave you the opportunity. We saved each other. Yeah, he said, smiling that smile that was hers alone. We did. The doorbell rang, announcing Helena's arrival, and they could hear her voice through the intercom. I'm here to save the day. Again. Caspian groaned. She's never going to let me live this down. Probably not. But she'll build the crib, feed us excellent Chinese food, and tell us stories about her grandchildren. True. And she'll probably have opinions about baby names. She's already sent me a list. It's color-coded by gender and alphabetized. Of course it is. As they went to let Helena in, Magnolia caught sight of their reflection in the hallway mirror. Caspian with his rumpled shirt and exasperated expression, her with her messy hair and pregnant glow, both of them grinning like idiots. They looked nothing like the polished couple from the society pages. They looked real, happy, and completely in love. They looked perfect, and they lived messily, chaotically, beautifully ever after. The end.